Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Way the World Works. Today, I'm going to talk about a topic that is probably going to drive the parents nuts because I'm going to talk about your kids' favorite numbers right now that you are probably so sick of hearing. I know that I am. And that is 6, 7. None of us know exactly why this has become so popular. But if you spend 5 minutes around kids today, you'll hear 6, 7. That's a 6, 7. How's that snack? 6, 7. And adults everywhere are groaning for a few reasons. One, we don't understand anything. If you're like me, it makes me feel very old because I'm like, what? Why have these numbers become so popular? So why do kids speak like this? Why do they have these silly things they say that, are driving us adults up a wall? So parents, while you're rolling your eyes and wondering why on earth this has happened, I even saw one article, and I actually really disagree with this, where as a joke, they had like local police officers come into the school and write tickets for kids saying 6, 7. This is a side note. I won't get on too much of a tangent. I get why that's like kind of cute and humorous. What I don't like about it is I don't think we should be normalizing giving kids tickets. I don't think we should normalize punishing people for their speech. I don't like, I get where their heart was. And I do think it's really important for police officers to like be part of the community so that they're not to keep them accountable, to be honest with you. But I don't love that. I don't like the lesson that's teaching, but that's a side note. I will get off my soapbox there. But so here's the twist. Here's the whole point of why on earth I am talking to this. What does this have to do with anything we talk about with the Tuttle twins? And I will tell you. The twist to all of this is that even though we think that this is annoying, even though we're groaning and rolling our eyes, 6, 7 actually teaches us something really amazing about economics. Okay. And that is spontaneous order, because all slang, all language actually is part of this spontaneous order that we talk about in the Miraculous Pencil, which I have right here, which if you guys do not have, sorry, there's like a glare on it, but there you go. So that's all about spontaneous order. This was an idea that was really championed by the economist F.A. Hayek, who I absolutely adore. He's the author of The Road to Serfdom, and there's also a Tuttle Twins book about the road to serfdom. But so he, believed, much like Adam Smith, who was the economist who talked about, or philosopher, I think, but who talked about the invisible hand, that there's a mechanism in the marketplace that is not government created, that is not government overseen. It's this invisible hand that guides the market, and you don't need anyone to do that for you because of this spontaneous order. And, we see that with price signals. If you listen to the Christmas episode I did on toy crazes like Tickle Me Elmo and Cabbage Patch Kids, if you're real old like me, and how these toy crazes, they actually send little floating messages, what I call them, these market signals that say how much a price should be and how much of a product you should create. And that is this spontaneous order. This is all these things that come together that don't require government force or government, overseeing things. And before I jump into language specifically and 6, 7, let's talk about, I'm even saying, they say it in such a like silly way. Oh, kids. But you know what? Me and your parents, we all had our own thing that was big. I remember at one point we said raise the roof, but I think that was from a song. There were other things that, there were also like little urban legends and things like that spread back in our day, which was quite extraordinary because back then it was without the internet. There were no TikTok videos or anything like that. So that's actually something I'll talk about in another episode. But spontaneous order, let's talk about it. So I want you, next time you see a flock of birds flying through the air in a formation, I want you to really think about that. And you watch them and it's incredible because you see them, weaving through the sky and they're in these formations, and nobody told them to get in that formation. There was just these signals, these market signals, they sent to each other. And I don't know what they are. I don't speak bird, unfortunately, but they're doing it, and they're doing it on their own. You also see this with schools of fish. You'll see them all, well, if you're snorkeling, you'll see them traveling together in these packs and going in the same direction, and nobody is directing them. There's no orchestra telling them where to go. Traffic is a similar way. I mean, yes, there are red lights or there are, traffic lights and things like that. But traffic has a way of like on the highways and stuff, yes, there's a speed limit, but they have a way of figuring it out and of signaling to each other and making sure that everyone drives relatively safely, because you have to understand that, yes, while there are horrific car accidents, the fact that more don't happen, I think, is proof of spontaneous order. And if you've ever heard of the Autobahn, I think it's in Germany, that's like a no rules type highway, and it works. It works out for people. Roundabouts, if you ever are in a roundabout and you see how people are able to do that, and yes, a government or, city planner or whatever built that roundabout. So I get that there is government involved, but there's no like lights, there's no one directing it, but people figure out how to do it. Or if they don't, they get honked at. But guess what? After that, they figure out how to do it. So there's also fashion trends. And I really love this. I mean, fashion. And again, remember back in the day before you had any sort of real connection with other countries. People would go abroad, they would see fashion, they'd bring it back to wherever they were. Thomas Jefferson was actually known for like bringing back French fashion when he was living in France and then came back to America. He was actually known for his fashion. He liked a lot of clothes. In fact, there was a story I read in the John Adams biography where he was actually like in debt because of you couldn't stop buying clothes, which I was, well, that's relatable. But inside jokes, things like that. Playground rules developing without a teacher. There's all these things that or spontaneous examples of spontaneous order in the real world. And it's, to put it plainly, it's when things get organized without someone planning it. There's no leader, there's no instruction, there's no boss. And let's talk about that now with language. No one voted to approve the phrase, 6-7 as something that was the thing that was going to take the country by storm. No principal sent out a memo saying, starting Monday, all students must say this. But suddenly one kid said it, then their friend said it, then other friends, and bam, it spread everywhere. And now it's actually part of the, American society, American culture. I'm not sure if it spread through, I don't know if it's like in Europe now. I'd have to check that. But, with TikTok and Reels and things like that, it is easier to spread things to other places, which is great. We should appreciate that. But kids didn't need a blueprint. Okay, they heard it, they liked it, they thought it was silly, I think, and copied it. And that's how language evolves. It's natural, it's free, and it's through these choices. It's through exposure to new ideas, to new things. And again, this is true for language as a whole. Nobody invented English. In fact, there wasn't even a consensus on how to spell certain words back in the day. And if you look at the original Declaration of Independence, you'll notice words are spelled, or even correspondence between founding fathers, you'll notice that there are words that are spelled very different from how we spell them today, because back then, things were even more decentralized because they didn't have the information sharing. They couldn't just Google, like, how do I spell this? Or use ChatGPT, right? So they were all just kind of spelling words how they were taught, and then figuring it out, which I think is really interesting because, it's not that long ago. 250 years, yeah, seems like a long time, but it's not really that long ago if you think about it. So nobody invented English. It just slowly changed and it evolved. Words like selfie, which I might be dated now, or hangry, I get hangry all the time, or even emoji, or even telling someone to Google something, though I think now that's even evolving into Ask ChatGPT, which is really interesting for somebody like me and probably your parents who've seen that evolve. Back in the day, we said Ask Jeeves because there was a search engine like Google, like Yahoo, which I don't even think I think it's still there, but Yahoo was another big one before Google. But there was a site that had like a butler named Jeeves, not like it was an animation, and he didn't even move. It was just a picture, but you would like ask Jeeves a question and it would answer. And to be honest, it wasn't that good of a search engine, which is probably why it's not around anymore. But, these are things that Ask Jeeves used to be something that every young person understood. Google it was something every young person or every person really understood. And now, we say ChatGPT. So there are these things that evolve, but they become part of our vernacular. And, Shakespeare actually invented words that we still use today. Schoolboy or cold-blooded. Those are Shakespeare invented words, right? So there was no dictionary council. In fact, there were different dictionaries. We see like Webster's dictionary. That's because that was a guy who was like, I'm going to sit down, I'm just going to make this. But there were other, in fact, and I wish I had the name, but the founding fathers used a different kind of dictionary. It wasn't the Webster dictionary. the founders used what was the Samuel Johnson dictionary. So there's been different kinds of dictionaries, and it's just like one guy trying to compile information down and make it a little easier. But different people use different dictionaries. And so you have people that, again, are trying to kind of centralize it, but there's always being words made up. And sometimes it happens in, through culture, pop culture. A song will say a word that becomes a thing, or a movie will say a word, or a television show, and then it becomes a thing. When I was, little, but like Full House, the show, there was a character that said, "How rude." And that became a thing that kids said. Or Steve Urkel from Family Matters, "Did I do that?" And then people would say it, and it became a phrase that was known. So that's really interesting. But let's think about it throughout time. In the 1950s, the cool, like hip kids, like they'd call them like cool cats, was like one of the, that's actually slang. They would say like, "Daddy-o, cool cat." They would say these things that were slang. One person started it, and it spread across the country. And again, I think it's even more remarkable back then because they didn't have the information sharing we have today. In 1980s, we used to say, and for the record, I don't remember all the 80s. I was born mid-80s, but people would say rad, tubular. Oof, yes, they'd really say tubular. Psych was a big one. I think kids sometimes say that now. Like if you were joking, you wouldn't say kidding, you'd say psych and then like laugh about it. 2000s, as if was one of them, but that was actually, I think, more 90s because that came from a movie called Clueless. And, today people say that's based or goated or no cap. And yes, 6'7". So these are things that evolved. So language is like one giant group project, but without the group or project having a leader, right? And it changes because millions of people, individual people, make choices every day. Some kid at some point got up and said 6'7", and look at everything that's happened. And here's the craziest thing. That kid may not even know that he's the one that did it. And remember in Miraculous Pencil, we talk about that, all these people are working together on a project, but they don't know each other. And it's even crazier that with language, you might not even know that you're the first person that thought of it. And I always wonder too with Shakespeare, like if he, what he would think if he saw that we say schoolboy and cold-blooded all the time. He probably couldn't have imagined that that would become part of language, of things we use. But it's crazy that these tiny little choices can create a domino effect. And this is spontaneous order in action. This is one of the most incredible and I think most tangible, most understandable versions of spontaneous order. And this spontaneous order, this is the same way that, markets decide what toys become popular or what food gets made, what fashions are cool. No one person is in charge, but they take a look at individual choices because every individual, again, is making these tiny choices. And it kind of ties into some things Mises said, the economist Ludovic Mises, about praxeology is what he called it. And it ties into this because the whole reason that Mises, people like Mises was saying that we can't have a planned economy, that centrally planning for an economy doesn't work. And it's because there's all these individual actors making all these individual choices. No government official has all the knowledge. This is what Hayek called the knowledge problem. No one person has all the knowledge to make central one-size-fits-all rules for the entire country or world for people who think that global government or global economy, like the World Economic Forum is a good idea. Spoiler alert, it's not. But so that's what's so crazy about this also is it's this idea that because we are individuals, because we each make our own choices, those choices have, a ripple effect. And there's, in a way, it's a way of planning. It's a way of orchestrating things, but without a government and without any real clear knowledge of what's going to happen. No dictionary, creator knew a year ago that 6'7" was going to be part of our language. And hopefully it doesn't last for too long. I think the parents are going nuts. But why? Why do the adults get nuts? It's interesting. And it's because we're not part of that particular slang spontaneous order anymore. We aren't plugged into the kid language network and, we haven't participated in this new evolution. And it feels weird for us sometimes. I will be honest, and this is so embarrassing. I used to look at TikTok videos that were like teaching people my age or teaching millennials what Gen Z meant when they said things like no cap, because I was like so lost. And when you start working with younger people, I was like, I don't know anything this person is saying. And so it's weird for us adults because suddenly we were the ones setting these cultural phrases, these cultural trends, and now we're not. So it's interesting. But that's the fact that we didn't create it is kind of why this matters, because kids, you can spontaneously, and you are spontaneously building your own culture through signals and these market signals and humor that nobody taught you. You just came up with it on your own. So, that's again, tying it back to the miraculous pencil. That's how it works. No boss is telling everyone what to do. People coordinate naturally through actions, choices, and creativity. So every time you invent a silly phrase or share a new expression, you're participating in a giant creative free market system, the same kind of system that, builds cities, solves problems, and makes markets work and brings us the miraculous pencil, right? So I think that's a really cool lesson. Remember that, parents. Next time your kid says 6'7" is driving you nuts, remember that it's a really good economic lesson. Deep breaths. We're going to get through this, I promise. We will leave it there. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends. And until next time, guys, I will talk to you later.